I want you to think about the last time you had a conversation with someone that felt like talking to a brick wall. If you actually can't think of any recent conversation like this, honestly, I'm so happy for you. But from what I've seen in the 20 short years I've been on this earth, most of us have had at least one absurdly frustrating conversation. Whether it was working retail, doing a school group project, or trying to convince a little kid that you're babysitting that, no, you absolutely cannot put a metal fork in an outlet. Sure, some of these stories are great icebreakers, but dealing with someone that refuses to hear what you're saying takes a toll on you. If you try to talk to someone who's decided, actually, I will make no attempt to relate to you once during this conversation, you might get a lot of back and forth, but very little comprehension or learning. That's not a real conversation. But that's what happens with a lack of empathy, which is precisely what I want to focus on today. You see, we live in a culture that kind of encourages us to be terrible people. That is to say, it's really easy and almost natural for us to downplay the feelings of the people we surround ourselves with. This explains how sometimes we do things like tell our friends after they finally open up to us that their problems aren't that bad, or ostracize a new kid at school if they seem a little bit weird, and then make fun of the new kid for crying in the bathroom every day at lunch. And on a completely unrelated note, I was not one of the people who enjoyed high school. I guess you could say that was part of the reason I grew to be really interested in what drives us to be terrible people. Because one thing I kept observing, over and over, almost like clockwork, is that all of our classrooms have these cute, inspirational posters on the walls that say things like, treat others the way you want to be treated. And then it's in these same classrooms that you'll hear kids using every violent and historically oppressive slur under the sun. And that does not check out. Like, okay, we were 14 and our prefrontal cortexes weren't fully developed. That could explain away the fights we got into with our parents for no reason, sure. But how do you explain an active interest in harming minorities? Like your average angsty teenager, I turned to literature for clarity. And lo and behold, I found the answer. Apparently, our natural inclinations towards being really mean people have a biological basis. Research shows evidence of an empathy gap between members of an in-group who are people that share the same genetic, cultural, or ideological traits, and members of an out-group who don't have these traits. There's an actual difference in brain activity and the amount of mirror neurons that start firing when we're in a position to empathize with someone who's either part of an in-group or an out-group. And here's the thing about the empathy gap in in-groups and out-groups. Our ability to A, understand the emotional states of individuals in our lives, and B, understand the conditions of marginalized groups, they overlap much more than you might think. The people in our lives are so diverse. They're so different in terms of their cultures, family backgrounds and dynamics, their genders, orientations, and then all the things that motivate them, and the stuff their dreams are made of, and all of the baggage that they carry and the obstacles they overcome every day. These traits are all so unique. So I guess the reason that I find the empathy gap being hardwired into our biology such a terrifying concept is because the way we communicate with others when we lack empathy is a tool we can use to uphold systems of oppression. It sure explains a lot of the ways that I've seen people hurt each other and not care about it. When we lack empathy, the fundamental humanity of someone in an outgroup isn't a given. It's not immediately obvious. It explains how every time my friends in middle school made a joke about my skin being darker than theirs, they couldn't comprehend why I lashed out the way I did and told me to calm down, and why I just started to go along with it and join in the self-deprecation. It's because they never understand. My mom, a new immigrant and also one of the only immigrants in small-town Newfoundland in 2007, took my sister to the playground when a little girl came up to her and asked, "Are you an alien?" And my mom, still coping with the anxiety that comes with hypervisibility, laughed because this girl was only like 4, and her parents wouldn't understand why they should teach their daughter better than to ask questions like that, because they just wouldn't get it. I think of the friends that have come out to me as we stayed up all night at summer camp, and they've told me that they have to hide this important piece of themselves from their homophobic parents for the rest of their lives, and just accept the fact that their parents are going to miss 1,000 of their important firsts, and that they have to lie when they get asked questions like, "What happened at school today?" Because they won't get it. I think of every single story from a woman that I care about where they tell me how they suffered from a serious incident of gendered violence. And I am sure I have now heard a million of these stories. And it kills me each and every time when they just have to come to terms with the fact that a lot of men in their lives will seriously hurt them, and they just have to deal with it through gritted teeth. Because they won't get it. And that's not an inclusive list. It barely scratches the surface. These negative experiences were all caused by a lack of empathy, which led to a breakdown in the way that people interacted with members of outgroups. After all, empathy facilitates social understanding and shapes our interactions. And it is through our interactions with others that we design the blueprints of our identities. And my identity is built of all my hopes and ambitions and all my experiences and memories. And also all of my damage, whether it's sudden changes I've faced, or self-esteem issues, or personal losses that have shaped me into who I am. But then there's another type of damage I don't tend to acknowledge, which occurs when I accept that they won't get it. It keeps coloring all of my interactions, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't do a number on my mental health. They don't understand my fundamental humanity. I have to prove it constantly, as a student, employee, artist, friend, whatever. Everything I build myself up to be means so little when I realize nobody is going to give me that fundamental humanity. Yeah, I can get the awesome position I've been dreaming of after spending forever preparing for the interview. And then yeah, that same night, people can joke about how I'm just a diversity hire. The work I put in means nothing to them. But hey, why should I complain? I've known those were the rules of the game since I was born. The empathy gap dictates to us that if you're a member of an outgroup that faces systemic, widespread forms of stigma, then the traits, the genetic, cultural, or ideological traits that are so central to your identity, these are the parts of you that are wrong. I talked about the bigotry of middle school kids and homophobic parents because their bigotry didn't just cause them hurt feelings, and don't get me wrong, those hurt feelings do matter so much. But their bigotry is also one of the many channels that society as a whole uses to reinforce the way we think, feel, and most importantly act in response to people different than us. Racism, xenophobia, patriarchy, all these different systems of oppression flourish when we decide people aren't even worth trying to relate to. And then we put these unfair expectations on members of outgroups to just persevere in the face of opposition. Sure, some of us will be able to accept ourselves despite everyone telling us how wrong we are. But frankly, not everyone has the resilience to thrive in an environment where even their family and friends reject them, the people who are supposed to understand them. Is that hard to conceptualize? Take the girl who found out she just has to work with a bunch of people that spent their night making fun of her for being the diversity hire. She has a couple of options in front of her. She could bring it up to her superiors or confront her colleagues directly, but at what cost? She's the only person of color in that whole group, so she thinks to herself, yeah, they probably wouldn't even get why that's such a slap in the face to me. They won't know how to deal with it, and I'll look like a crybaby. Worse, I'll look like the aggressor and be swiftly removed from the team. So she instead chooses to swallow her hurt feelings, pretend nothing ever happened, and keep working with the people that only see her as the diversity hire. I did all of that a little while ago, and honestly, it's one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I shouldn't have had to do that. So I sincerely hope at this point you agree with me when I say that the concept of the empathy gap sucks. Like, maybe as a 14-year-old nihilist, I happily accept the thought of this cognitive bias wreaking havoc on the interpersonal relationships of anyone who belongs to an outgroup. But that had a lot more to do with the fact that I was so desperate for some type of answer as to why such a thing even happened. As a slightly more well-read 20-year-old, I now realize that systems of oppression are complex and don't just stem from the formation of in-groups and out-groups. As a slightly more impatient 20-year-old, I'm also tired of making excuses for people that choose not to relate to me because of things I will never be able to control. Offering empathy to someone else, even in the face of difference, that's the bare minimum. This traditional notion that we are born either being really good at empathy or really bad at empathy is one I'm sick of. We are not static beings, and we, as a collective, can change our approach to empathy by viewing it as a decision we make. Every time we're in an empathetically challenging situation, we can either choose to disengage from putting in relational effort, or we can choose to engage with our emotional state and actively invest our energy into being empathetic. If we're the victims of a natural, maybe evolutionary instinct to ostracize others, then that means we need to put in the work to understand others. Because empathy is not as automatic as we make it out to be. But it starts with willingness. You've got to be willing to spend time talking to someone who might otherwise be excluded. And you've got to be willing to talk to them in a genuine and positive way, so that you might start to understand the full range of their complexity. What unique perspective do they offer? What's their history? What's their sense of humor like? You can ask more questions. You can be a better listener. There are so many ways in which we can make legitimate attempts to be more empathetic and override what we consider an automatic lack of empathy. Making this effort is crucial, because it's the way we can reduce stigma, reduce conflict, and produce more positive social outcomes. Accepting and being yourself becomes so much easier when you finally feel like someone's listening to you. When one of my classmates finally stood up to my friends and told them to stop making racist jokes, and didn't even shy away from using the word racist, I felt like I got my voice back. When the people in small town Newfoundland saw that my mom felt shy about speaking English because she wasn't fluent yet, they would constantly go out of their way to talk and make conversation with her, get to know her as a person, and make her feel comfortable. And these days, she actually won't stop talking. We owe it to everyone else in this world to fully be able to empathize with them. I want so badly to be recognized as a complex human being, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way so strongly and so desperately. The relationship between our personal interactions and social hierarchies is complicated, but if we stop allowing implicit biases to influence the way we interact with the people in our lives, we render this one tool of oppression powerless. And when we give people their fundamental humanity, we're able to develop the resiliency that allows us, as a diverse and wildly different set of people, to survive in the face of conflict. And sometimes it's just as easy as having a real conversation with someone. That's why I'm a firm advocate for overcoming the empathy gap.